Hey there, friends and running fans. This is Amby Burfoot, and I'm joined with George Hirsch for a slightly unusual episode of our podcast, Running State of the Sport. We've got a number of interesting interview subjects lined up for future weeks, but for today, we're just going to pile on with some of the recent running news because there's been so much of it, and quite a bit of it is either very important or very, very interesting. We're going to start with a few thoughts about people who are not with us any longer or dealing with difficulties, and then we'll get on to the real hardcore running news. George, I know you went to the recent memorial service for the great pioneer female runner, Nina Kusek. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, Amby, I was very happy to go out to Huntington, Long Island, and join so many friends of Nina's. She was, as you say, one of the true pioneers of the sport. Humble. She goes way back to the early days, and you and I can think of Nina, I think, always with a big smile on her face. There was something just very joyful about her. Nina and I ran our very first marathon together. We didn't run it step for step together, but we ran it the same year, Boston, 1969. And she and I have been, long-term friends. I remember I sent $2 and a letter from a doctor saying that I was presumably fit enough to run the race. Nina did neither of those since she was not an official entrant back then in 1969. But she ran, and she ran well. And we had been friends, and we were brought together back then by Vince Chepngetich, who at the time was the president of the New York Roadrunners and certainly was a mentor to me, and I think helped get Nina into the sport of running as well. And then it was after that, in 1970, Nina was the only woman to toe the starting line in the first New York City Marathon that was run loops around Central Park. Unfortunately, she was ill. She had not been feeling well before the race and was unable to finish, but she was the first woman to start the first New York City Marathon. And then after that, she came back and won it officially. And finally, in 1972, when Boston belatedly opened up the race officially to women. Women had been running the race, Bobby Gibb and Nina and Catherine Switzer, all famously so. They opened it up, and Nina was the first official woman winner of the Boston Marathon. She and I were really good friends. Amby, you remember a race that I loved that we had in Central Park here in New York called the Trevira Twosome. And
I was going to say that you must have run with Nina in that race.
Pardon me?
You must have run with Nina in that race, I'm guessing.
Oh, every year. Nina and I had made a decision that we would be partners for life. And as long as that race lasted, we were. And each person ran individually their own race, 10 miles. Then they added up the time, and you added up your age, and we were competitive, but never won the 100 to 120 year age group. And the reason we didn't win, Amby, you'll appreciate this, was because Fritz Mueller, who's a name you'll remember, who's about my age, was just a fantastic local runner. Fritz, at the age of, 41, 42, had run 2 hours and 20 minutes in the Boston Marathon. And this is, ages and ages ago. He was just terrific. And Fritz always showed up with a partner. So Nina and I, we never did win that race, but we sure had fun being partners in it. She was a beloved figure, I think is the best way to put it. She never was one to put herself out there. And yet she worked very hard in the organization of the sport, along with Catherine Switzer, others. She certainly was a major player in getting the marathon into the Olympics, which of course first happened in 1984. So we love Nina and we miss her. That's all I can say on that.
Well, George, I did not know Nina as well or closely as you, but being in her relative age group, everyone at the time knew Nina, and everyone loved Nina because she always had that smile on her face. She had a little giggle, which was kind of young girlish and infectious and quite wonderful. You put that together with Nina. Every time you saw her, she ran races all up and down the East Coast, winning a lot of them. Of course, not all. She wasn't always the fastest female runner out there, but she was one of them and one of the most engaging and delightful. And I'm glad you mentioned her organizational contributions to women's running, because I think those sometimes go overlooked because, as you say, she didn't toot her own horn. She wasn't out there trying to impress anyone with her contribution. She was just doing it quietly. And she was going to AAU meetings where all the nasty stuff happened. I mean, nobody went to an AAU meeting. I've never been. I don't know if you have been. They were so well known to be just a worthless waste of time. But she went because that's where the work was and where you had to make your presentations and try and get a few other people on board. And so her contributions were just phenomenal. A couple of other people I want to mention, and one in a similar vein, the great long-distance running marathoner, age group record holder from India, a guy named Fauja Singh, who finished the London Marathon when he was 101 years old, running 7:49, was recently 114 and still out there, at least doing some walking briskly on the streets of his town in India, but was hit by a car and tragically killed recently. And we miss all of the great age group runners, of course, but I took a little bit of something from the fact that he was actually out there exercising at the time that his last moments came. So he is an inspiration to many. And I also want to say something about a top podcaster in the running world, and that's a young woman named Allie Feller. Allie is not someone of our vintage, George. She knows about 6% as much about running as you and I do. But she has done an unparalleled job in the running podcast arena for the last 5 or 6 years. 2 or 3 times a week, she is doing podcast interviews with the best and most interesting runners out there. She gets Des Linden. She gets Chelsea Clinton. I mean, who gets Chelsea Clinton on their running podcast? She recently did Grant Fisher, and I learned more about the Faith Kipyegon race from her podcast with Grant Fisher than I did from any other source out there. It was just fascinating how much the male pacing group practiced in advance of the Faith Kipyegon event. Anyway, Allie has, from almost nothing, made herself the most prodigious and professional, absolutely professional running podcast journalist out there in terms of being the person who gets the interview with everybody. And she has had a little cancer, I should never say little, with cancer in her past, and has a recurrence now. And all I can say is we all wish Allie the best and hope that she will be continuing her running podcast for a long, long time with as much health and spirit and energy and breadth of questions. She asks the most interesting questions because she isn't a complete running nerd. She's just really interested in the whole person that she interviews. So we wish Allie the best in her current battle and hope she can turn the corner.
I think the whole running community's been following her, and she's been so open and courageous in sharing her cancer diagnosis and treatments with her listeners. And yeah, I think we're just all in full support of her, and I love listening to her. And like you, I listened to that very recent one with Grant Fisher, and I know we want to chat later about the Faith Kipyegon breaking four. So I agree with you. I think the interview that Ali did with Grant really brought more insight into that whole thing than anything else I'd read or listened to. So why don't we save that, and when we get to the breaking four, we can talk a little bit more about it.
That's a great idea. And one of the wonderful things about podcasts is because they can go on for 40 or 50 or 60 minutes. If you got a welcoming guest, you get a detail and a depth from these podcast interviews that you just can't get in any kind of written article, because the written articles are short and they have to have, their bullet points and whatnot. And they skim the surface, don't go deep. But Ali and you and I and many other running podcasters try to go deep in our podcasts, and that adds a whole special depth again to the sport and an understanding of the sport that you can't get anywhere else. So, of course, the reason we're talking today, having gone through all this introduction, is the news 48 hours ago, I think it was, that Ruth Chepngetich had failed a doping or at least a masking agent test this spring. That brings up, again, the whole question of the incredible 2:09:56 that she ran at Chicago last fall. There were many of us, and I suppose I was one of the starkest in doubting that performance. But I take no joy, and none of us do, from this test result. And it's just the beginning of the road, because there's a lot of due process that's going to happen now, and a lot of more evidence and a lot more interviewing of Ruth, presumably, and people around her. All we know now is that perhaps there were good suspicions surrounding that 2:09:56 last October in Chicago. George, what were your first thoughts, and any other you've had since you heard the news?
Yeah, well, Amby, you're right. The skepticism at the time, breaking 2:10, and by the way, that was a full 2 minutes better than an already recent astonishing world record in the marathon. So skepticism was widespread at the time. You were out in front. You were very outspoken that this just wasn't real, and you put yourself out there and you said so. So I think it just keeps with each of these positives, and nothing gets bigger than when the world record holder in the marathon tests positive. That is big news, and it's a terrible black eye for the sport, for sure. And then the questions keep coming. What needs to be done? Stiffer penalties, lifetime bans. What penalties are for the agents, the coaches, should they themselves be facing bans from major, like World Marathon major races, and holding back prize money? Some of that's been done. It's been held in escrow. But so far, none of it has obviously corrected the problem, and it's a problem that has certainly not done this sport any good.
So I agree totally with that, George. I'm going to come back to you with a question in a moment, but I want to first say about my skepticism on Ruth's record last fall. There were a number of reasons I was skeptical, but number one by far was the fact that she was a mid-career marathon runner. She had had 6 or 7 years of stellar marathon performances in her resume. She was a consistent 2:14 or 2:15 marathon runner. She was a World Championships winner in that super hot Doha World Champs marathon. And everything pointed to the fact that she was a 2:14 marathoner. And anyone who's been at the marathon, running it themselves for more than a few years, knows that you can make really good progress in those first 5 years. But at some point, you kind of hit your plateau. And when you hit your plateau, it is incredibly difficult to make a big leap forward. Maybe you can claw in a couple of seconds here and maybe a minute there. But to go from 2:14 to 2:09 in mid-career, and it was a time in her career, by the way, when she had stalled. Her last year and a half had not been good. It was that mid-career jump forward that really put me over the edge, because I just don't see that happening in athletes at large. Here's my question for you, George, and we can go back and forth on these things for a long time, I think. But let's assume that this sport of ours, athletics or marathon running or something, is in fact an organized sport, which sometimes it doesn't look that way, but let's assume it is an organized sport, which means that somewhere there's an organization and a person who should have a big desk where the buck stops. So my question is, where does the buck stop on these marathon cheats? Why does it keep happening too often? Who's responsible?
It's a great question. I guess obviously World Athletics, the international federation overseeing the sport, has to play a major role, as do the federations of the countries of these athletes. I think I use the word we now. I'm now retired as the chairman of the New York Roadrunners, but the World Marathon Majors, I think these have to be, and look, they're doing things. I mean, let's not suggest that there haven't been some strides made. But when you get a hit like this on the sport, it's pretty devastating. And I think it's time for all of those that I've mentioned and the individual events. The individual events carry their own responsibilities, their own standards. These races, it's a privilege to be invited if you're an elite athlete. And these races, they're not like the Olympics. It's not if you qualify, you get to run. The races have a say in all of that, and that they don't all play by the same set of standards as we know. So more work has got to be done after something like this. It's just very clear.
I agree with you about World Athletics and the role of SEBCO, but that's a big world, and there's a lot of track and field out there that SEBCO has to be concerned with, and World Championships and Olympics. And really the big problem appears to be at the World Marathon Majors level, because these are the races with the cash. These are the races paying big appearance fees and big prize monies, and also absolutely dying to have folks run fast times, maybe world records on their courses. So I would really like to see World Marathon Majors step up a bit. There is a loose organization in addition to the 6 or 7 races, which are all joined together, but also independent, as you noted. I would like to see the organization, which has a CEO, step up and try and get all of the races to agree to a set protocol, whether that's better and more testing, or not inviting certain athletes or athletes from certain camps or managers. And we all know that one particular Italian manager has had a lot of athletes fail after winning big races. I'm not sure an agent can be totally held responsible for athletes who live thousands and tens of thousands of miles away. But when it happens 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 times, yeah, we got to do something. And also maybe I think what Seb Coe could do, what World Athletics could do, would be to strip world records ex post facto, which they haven't done and doesn't even sound legal, but we need something stronger. We've been scratching our heads over this for so long. We had the East Germans and the Soviet bloc 50, 60 years ago, and now everybody's fingering the Kenyans because they're fast and they've had a lot of doping problems in recent years. But what isn't happening is anyone taking a really strong stance to move us forward. I don't have the answer, but I want somebody to say, I'm in charge, it's on my desk, and I'm going to do something.
Well said. Yeah. Yep. Well, let's stay on the story and let's hear, what the federations, the organizations, the World Marathon Majors are going to be saying in days ahead. And you and I will keep reporting it out and talking to our listeners about it. I think it's of critical importance to the sport. If people don't trust what they're seeing, the sport is never going to get to the levels that we want it to.
Well, I'm sure we will be continuing to follow it as much as we can. It's difficult because it's all shielded by privacy laws and processes that actually can take quite a long time to go all the way through, especially if they go to the Court of Arbitration for Sports. But I would like to add that as bad as this is, you can, and I'm a skeptic, you can see a little piece of bright light here, which is they caught one of the big fish. And forever, people have been saying the sport is covering up and they're never going to nail one of the big fish. They're always going to get the small fries and let the big ones get away with it. Well, no, it didn't happen this time. Ruth Chepngetich with that race in Chicago is as big an athletics marathon performer as we've got in the world. And they caught her. And they caught her dead to rights. Her degree of this diuretic they found in her, I'm not sure if it was blood or urine, was 190 times.
It was terrible.
They can, there's no burrito defense here. There's no defense. She's caught, and in fact, she more or less admitted it by accepting a personal provisional suspension from the very beginning. And of course, we know now that it's why she didn't run the London Marathon, where her race against the other greats was very, very much anticipated by everyone, especially the organizers in London. Now we know, and we just wait and see where all this ends up and whether or not she can or will be stripped of a world record, which is clearly a ludicrous world record at this point. Whether or not she can or will be stripped of 1 or 3 Chicago Marathon titles. Does any race have world championships? Do any of these events have any ability to recapture lost monies that have been paid to agents and athletes? There's little to no belief that has happened in the past, but I think the systems are getting a little bit better now. So it's a big story because it reverberates through every aspect of our sport, at least at the elite level.
Well, let's shift gears to some really terrific stuff in the sport, and boy, there's been some good stuff, and by that I mean Faith Kipyegon. We can talk about her, and we can talk about the pre-meet, which Amby, the Prefontaine meet, the 50th running of the Prefontaine meet out in Eugene. It was the best one-day track meet that I've seen and recall. I mean, these things, and we don't want the Chepngetich to overshadow so many things like that really are lifting the sport at the same time. So let's go on and, why don't we talk first? We mentioned we were going to talk about Nike's staged event, the Breaking Four. You and I spoke about it shortly beforehand, and we predicted that she was not going to run a 4-minute mile. That just didn't seem in the cards, as spectacular as she is, and she's the greatest 1,500-meter miler female who's ever lived. But we're just not there at this point. And we saw that. It was a great effort, and she stuck with her pacers, all 13 of them. Nike didn't spare anything technically in terms of staging that event and in Paris. And of course, they made it a big time production, as only Nike can do. But to go out and to try to run a 4-minute mile, she paid the price in the last 400 meters. And she was 3:01 at 3/4. And the next thing you know, she was struggling and ran a 65-second final 400, which I think showed us that this is just out of reach. Certainly at this point in our life, maybe that day is going to come. And I mean, like everything, I suspect it will come, but we're not close to it yet. And Faith was super fit, and we saw that 9 days later. Amby, she shows up at the pre-meet, runs 1,500 meters, lowered her own world record, which was below 350. This time she goes below 349. And interestingly enough, to me, the converted time of her 1,500 meter was actually faster than the time she ran in Breaking Four, which was slightly faster than her own world 4:06 record in the mile. So we know just how incredibly good she is. She's just spectacular. So it was great. Yeah.
Well, Faith is just the greatest middle distance runner of any sex that we've ever seen, with 3 straight Olympic titles, if I'm not mistaken. Nobody has done that. And I want to say that she ran absolutely brilliantly in the Breaking Four effort. I was one of those who in advance said, almost like I said about Ruth Chepngetich, this is ridiculous, people. It's not going to happen. It's beyond the bounds of female physiology. And cast myself again as this male chauvinist pig or something, which is not really what I am. And I have written entire books about the great women runners of the world. I'm not sure that trying to believe in a 2:09 or a sub-4 actually advances women's athletics. And that's a long discussion. I'm not a believer in magical thinking. I believe running is a sport of gradual progression, no matter who you are, and that some of these jumps forward were just way too far to be believed. Nike, I guess, got a ton of great publicity from the Kipyegon race. Some people think that 4:06 or 4:07 is almost 4 minutes. Those people who know the sport realize that there's a huge gap, 6 or 7 seconds in 1,500 meters or the mile. It was interesting to me that in the Prefontaine meet, where, as you noted, Faith ran so terrifically, I believe she closed the last 200 meters in about 28.5. In the Breaking Four race, she was closer to 34 or 35 seconds in the last 200 meters. And there's 7 seconds right there. Why was she so slow at the end of breaking four. Well, every grade schooler, junior high school, college, or older runner who's ever run a mile knows that when you go out too fast, the first lap, you pay a really, really steep price the last lap. And that's exactly what happened to Faith. She recapitulated everything we have known for 100 years about running the 4-lap race. And she was brave and courageous and apparently believing in her Nike advisors that 4 minutes was possible, because she did go out in very close to 2 minutes for the first 2 laps. And she, as I said, she was just fantastic. She attacked the thing. She was exhausted afterwards, but then she jumped up and was all smiles and was hugging everyone and was congratulating all of her 13 pace setters, I guess it was. And we'll talk about Grant Fisher and the pace setting in a moment. She's a superstar, and she has been for a long time. And she's definitely one of the great stories in the history of running. I was surprised. Go ahead, George.
No, I didn't mean to step on you there, Amby. I was just thinking about what we had talked about earlier when Grant Fisher was interviewed by Ali, and he had made a suggestion that showed a lot of insight, and it's just really what you've been talking about here about this. He said, if she had set her goal as a 4:04, which of course wasn't the point of any of it, she probably would have achieved that. And I think that's really interesting and true, because on that final lap, she went into what Grant Fisher said is when a runner goes into a dark place. I mean, she put everything out there. And as you said, the final 400 was nothing like the final 400 she ran in a competitive Prefontaine race, where she ended up lowering her world record at 1,500 meters. It was a completely different paced event. And I think Grant Fisher's right. I think if the goal had been 4:04, she would have run 4:04.
After the race, I read an article in praise of Faith Kipyegon and maybe less so of Breaking 4, to say that Nike should have titled it Breaking 3 and had her run 3 laps. She would have been right on the line for a 1,200 meter or 3-lap race, I think. But Breaking 4 was just a little bit too much. Before we go to the men's mile, which we want to talk about because it's just so fascinating, deep, and interesting this year, let's not miss the fact that we now have a new 5,000-meter world record set by Beatrice Chebet, who ran 13:58.06 in the Prefontaine Classic. She's been unbeatable the last several years, 2 gold medals in Paris last year. And oops, gulp, hesitation, has the same athlete representative as Ruth Chepngetich. I don't know what to make of that. I think personally that Beatrice has been sensational from her first days on the track a few years back, and there's nothing crazy about her progression as there was with Ruth. But George, does the agent manager connection bother you a little?
You know, it's funny. Around Ruth, the rumors were swirling, as we know. As I said earlier, there was just an awful lot of skepticism. And somehow, you know, the rumor mill isn't always right, but it does sort of tend to know something. You haven't been hearing that about Beatrice. You get the feeling she's a phenom and legitimately the first woman to break 14 minutes for 5,000 meters. Someone had to do it. So I just don't know. But I don't feel like certainly pointing any fingers at what may be a truly phenomenal athlete.
I agree with you. I'm not pointing anything at Beatrice. But I will point out, I will say that I've essentially lost all confidence in competition post-race drug testing because there are no athletes who fail the drug tests in competition these days. Whatever it takes, whether it's big science or little science, they have figured out how to beat the testing at the competition venue. They only get dinged in the out of competition testing, which is what happened with Ruth Chepngetich and so many of the others in the last 6 years or so. So I guess I hope we figure out a way to maybe put a little bit more money into the out of competition testing, tighten up the science, which I'm sure they're doing every single day, and keep marching forward as best we can.
Amby, who was it who said to test positive in post-race testing takes one thing, and that's a low IQ?
Yeah, you're right. We have to look that one up.
People know, I don't know who the quote's attributed to, but people generally know better when they get there. They know exactly what's going to, awaiting them. But let's talk about the men's mile, 1500, the mile. I still love the mile distance. They're similar events, similar group of runners. At the moment, with the World Championship coming up soon, national championships coming up right around the corner, I think it's the single best event in the world of track and field, the men's 1500. And you just take a look at what we're seeing. We saw that incredible race in Paris, Cole Hocker sneaking in on the inside and stealing the race from Josh and Jared Naguse and Jakob Ingebrigtsen, not in the money. These are the big hitters in this event. And then you go to something like the pre-race, the Bowerman Mile, and Jared Naguse just ran what I would call a near perfect race. A mile is what, Amby, 1,609 meters. And I think Jared Naguse ran a perfect 1,600 meters. And only in the last step did he get overtaken by the fastest closing finisher that I've remembered. Didn't come out of nowhere exactly. He was an Olympic finalist in Paris, but the young Niels Lauros, the Dutchman, who ran 3:45.94, an incredibly fast mile. But what was spectacular was the last 200 meters, it was like he was shot out of a slingshot. He came from a 2 full seconds back with 200 meters to go to nail Jared right at the tape. And I had to go back and watch that last, lap of that race several times. It was just that thrilling and that, hard to believe. And so this event now, and you add this young runner from Kenya, Fanuel Koech, who just won the London Diamond Meet, along with the others that we just named. The field is spectacular. And to me, what's so interesting about the mile, called Mile 1500, Amby, is the other events. The sprints are so dominated by Americans and Jamaican, certainly with a Gillian Alred from St. Lucia and Tobago from Botswana. But, the real champions by and large are these Americans, Noah Lyles, Kenny Bednarik, the Jamaicans, and the distance runners. We know what that is. It's going to be over and over, largely Kenyans and Ethiopians. But take the mile run. You've got like the 6 or 7 fastest in the world, and they come from 6 different countries. I mean, it's just the most international of all the track and field events we've got. And I think that just only adds to the to the glamour of the event right now.
Well, you're certainly right that the mile finishes are just thrilling now. They're often as close as the 100-meter finish. I mean, we need photos to figure out who was first, second, and third sometimes. And unlike the 100 meters, there's a couple of minutes of prelude. So you can watch the guy who runs in eighth place for 3.5 laps and then has a tremendous acceleration. Or you can watch the Nagoose, who is apparently never going to consider himself the best kicker out there. So he's always going to be near or at the front of the race, pushing it. And boy, he ran great at the pre-meet and held on, as you said, for almost a mile, maybe 1,600 meters. And then there are new faces. You mentioned you mentioned Cole Hawker in Paris a couple of times, and of course you were referring to the Paris Olympics last summer. This year, Cole Hawker's been in a number of top races in the mile, but hasn't been really close to competing for the win in them. Meanwhile, Paris has been everywhere in the mile. It's where Faith Kipyegon ran, and it's where this incredible 18-year-old Kenyan, whose name I might have to get used to, Fanuel Kipkosgei-Koech, he ran a world record for under 20, a 3:27.72. That was a 1,500 meters, but that's equivalent to, I don't know, a 3:44 mile or something. And as you said, he just did it again today in London in a race I haven't even seen yet. But he's the new face. Everybody else is in the mix. And Jakob Ingebrigtsen, who we love to talk about anytime we're talking 1,500 and 5,000, Jakob has been injured for a couple of months. I think reports are now that he's healthy and training, but nobody's exactly sure that he'll be fit enough to show up at the World Champs in Tokyo. 1,500 isn't even his best event. He hasn't won it in a number of global races recently, but he's certainly been a part of them, and he's certainly on everyone's mind, and he's certainly the favorite in the 5,000 meters, almost no matter who goes up against him, because he's got the strength and he's got that great miler speed at the end. So this event is so deep. It's in flux, in a good way of flux. New faces coming up constantly, almost every week from around the world. As you've noticed, it's not just a British-American 1,500 mile thing any longer. Everybody in the world seems to be running well at the 4-lap or almost 4-lap distance. And without doubt, it will be one of the most anticipated races at the World Championships in mid-September in Tokyo, which has seemed a long way away for a long time, and now it's seeming pretty close. It's coming on quickly, so we look forward to Tokyo for sure. George, we've covered a lot of stuff. I don't know if and there's news on our list that we're not going to get to, but that's normal. Is there anything else you think we should say?
Yeah, we interviewed David Roach before the Western States. So let's talk a little bit about it. It's an event that I'm relatively new to, and I followed a lot of it this year as it unfolded, and watched a good bit of it. What was your sense of all of it? I was clearly rooting for David because you and I have, we've gotten to know him a little bit through the podcast, and he's such a likable, winning guy, and he put it all out there on the line. He was going for it, and it didn't happen. So what did you take away from that?
Well, I was watching Western States really closely this year. I thought it was going to be one of the great ultra-distance races, if not the greatest of all time, when it had Jim Walmsley in the field. He had to scratch due to injury. But it was still really interesting, particularly for David Roach, who we now know and follow, and also Kilian Jornet coming back after, 11 or 14 years since his last one. And Kilian ran fantastic. He finished third. but he was an hour faster than he was his last time more than a decade ago. So he's still getting better. David had an up and down race. He went out pretty hard. He was with the leaders. He faded a little bit. I thought he was coming back, but then he had a quite disastrous end to his race. And being David Roach, which is to say being a guy who talks a lot about every thought that comes rushing through his head, in his podcast with his wife, Megan, he has since said a number of things, including he thinks he maybe took too much sodium, maybe he didn't take enough gels, which are his favorite thing. But he's mainly talked about the fact that the point in the race where he started feeling really bad and was vomiting on the course at 62 miles. And he made the comment, everybody vomits at Western States, which makes it sound very attractive, doesn't it? At the point where he started feeling very bad and even had fuzzy vision and lost some vision, his mental state went sideways on him, and he started thinking that maybe he was dying. Maybe he was doing something so desperate to his body that he wasn't going to survive this. He immediately started thinking about his two young sons and the fact that he really wanted to be the father to those sons for a lot of years forward. And with that ringing around in his head, soon dropped out of the race a little past 62 miles. The race was won. The two divisions at Western States were won by Caleb Olson, who came close to a course record despite a very, very hot year. And the female winner was Abby Hall, who just 2 years ago had major reconstructive surgery to a knee after a running training incident. She hurt herself on just an everyday run around home, but it led to some bad knee issues that needed correcting. She came back from that 2 years ago to win, so it was a terrific story for her. The race didn't have its course record holders, Jim Walmsley or Courtney DeWalter, but it's still Western States. I mean, it's the Boston Marathon of the ultras. Everybody tries to get there. And the attention that David Roach and Kilian Jornet brought on the race this year upped it considerably in the number of people aware of it and following it. And I'm sure I'll continue to follow it in years going forward. You think that's a wrap?
I think so. I think we covered a lot. There's been a lot going on in the sport, on the track and the roads, and off as well. And this was fun, Amby. Just you and I, kind of, riffing the way we've done over countless years. Usually after a meet or in the press section, sometimes over a beer, and it's what we like about this sport. It's a great sport when all's said and done. So I'm looking forward to the Nationals, and I'm definitely getting pumped up about Tokyo and the World Championships coming up before you know it.
George, in the Nationals, which I think are just 2 weeks away, some of those incredible college milers are going to be running against the open U.S. greats. These guys have been banging out 3:48s every weekend. That doesn't cut it anymore, but they're in the game, and it's going to be really exciting to see the next wave of young talent.
Yeah, it's true. There's a lot coming, and who knows? One of these 3:48 guys, Strand, one of them, could be your next 3:45 guy, and right in the mix. It doesn't take that long when you're still, when you're still gaining strength and speed the way they are.
When you're at that age, nothing is impossible, and you see these other guys who are just a couple of strides ahead of you, and you think, why not me? And so we will find that out soon, and in the meantime, George and I will be back in a week or two, probably with a podcast guest more than talking to each other. But this week there was so much news, and we haven't been on the pod for a while. We wanted to catch up. We will let you know when we're back and who's with us next. And as always, thank you very much for listening.